Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Phil Risher, and on today's episode, we have Margeaux Thomas with us. Margeaux helps business owners stay in compliance and get out of legal issues. And she specialized actually in business law, specifically partnerships, contracts, and some part of scaling businesses through different things. And I actually got in contact with Margeaux through one of my friends who was recently on the podcast named Otto. And I was asking him anyone else that could add value to our audience. And he's like, yeah, you got to reach out to Margeaux. She definitely can. And so, Margeaux, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was doing my homework and a little research on you, and from what I saw, I guess were your parents entrepreneurs growing up, or were they in business in some aspect?
Yes, they were real estate. They had a real estate investment company. So I
Oh,
was born in Cleveland, Ohio. So they
yeah.
started buying properties there and renting them out. And that was the beginning, I guess, the roots of entrepreneurship in my family.
Oh, wow. And so in real estate, there's a lot of legal stuff going on. Were you always in like business um law and stuff, or have you done other things before that, or how did you get into business law?
I was always in business law. I actually went to law school and thought that I wanted to do criminal law. I really loved Law and Order, and it
Oh,
was
yeah.
just fascinating to me. And I even worked at a prosecutor's office while I was in law school, and I really loved it. But when I got out, when I was leaving law school,
Hmm.
a lot of your career trajectory is based upon the opportunities that present themselves. And I got a offer to join a really great firm doing business law, and it
Wow.
was, an offer I couldn't refuse. So that's where I
Yeah.
started, and I loved it. It's something that is really interesting. It's not it changes. There's so many new issues and it's evolving. So, it kind of keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, for sure. And so now you work with companies that are looking to either like form business partnerships or unfortunately if business partnerships go south, maybe helping them untangle the mess that's happened. Is that right?
Yes, we work with business owners through the life cycle of their business, from the first day when they're a startup to leasing property, bringing in independent contractors or employees, trying to scale their business. And if they want to sell it at some point, we can help them with that. Or if there's any type of dispute with their clients or vendors or business partners, we work with them to resolve those as well.
Okay. So when someone's going to be forming a business partnership, whether that's they're starting out or maybe they're thinking about bringing on a partner, what are some of the best practices or things that they should be sure to do?
I think businesses are very much like marriage. So I make a lot of comparisons between marriage and business, but it is like, especially if you're going to have a business partner, there's a lot of communication that goes on there. There's a lot of goal alignment of how you're going to scale the business. And there are a lot of decisions that have to be made, major decisions that you need to be on the same page about. So I tell people that I can help you with the business prenup, so to speak. But I think that premarital counseling in the business context is also very important, because a lot of the issues, most of the people that we encounter, it's not a contract issue when it's business partners. It is more of a communication issue. They have different goals or ideas of how the business should be run. They think they're doing more than the other business partner. They feel some resentment, or they feel alone, or, there's similar emotions that you go through going through a regular divorce. So I think it is a very good idea either for the business partners to sit down and have some very difficult conversations about, what they envision as far as how this business will be run, who is going to be sitting at the desk, who's going to be answering the phone, who's going to be handling the books. Like, a lot of people just, say, we got a great idea, let's go. They don't want to talk about the details. And I think the devil
Yeah.
is really in the details, similar to in a marriage. A lot of marriages break up because of money. A lot of businesses break up because of money. So
Yeah.
that is one of the issues. People have different risk tolerance when it comes to money. That is a fundamental issue that can make or break a business partnership. So that's something that needs to be discussed on the front end.
Y-
So
Yeah, I agree. We have a company that we work with. They're an HVAC contractor, and the owner is a very heavy technician side of things. He knows HVAC inside and out, and he's thinking about bringing on a partner to run sales. It's one of his lifelong friends who's really good at sales and like run the operations of the business and basically like grow the business, sales, revenue. And you mentioned about premarital counseling for business. Is that like maybe like reading a book together and like going through something, or is there actual things that you would recommend to people before they do that?
go online and pull questions that are a good starting point. Or, I see some people go, they have business coaches that specialize in
Mm,
that will talk to the partners and work through some of those issues or try to identify what those issues will be now before you're in the partnership and then discover that you're not on the same page. So there's different ways to explore that, but I think a lot of people don't give any thought to having those conversations and they're more focused on running with the idea and getting it started, especially when you're dealing with a friend, a lifelong friend, or a spouse, or a child, or, somebody that you've known. So it's not like going into business with a stranger where you would, be asking those questions. You feel like you know this person. But knowing somebody in a friendship capacity or even a family member is not the same as working with them. That's a totally different relationship. And I think that people kind of um they don't give enough thought to how that will change the dynamic of their relationship. And if they don't, the sad part is, if their business breaks up, that's usually going to affect that lifelong friendship, which is really unfortunate.
yeah. We had another scenario of a business. It kind of what you were saying was it was a husband and wife, 50-50 partners, and the man was the one who was more running point. The woman did more of the office stuff on the back end. And 30 years into the business, they get divorced. Well, then he had to buy her out and go through this whole thing, and they also had real estate involved because they owned the building. And 30 years ago, I'm sure they didn't think about this happening. But to your point, it's like you got to set it up on the front end the right way, hopefully, so that way when it comes to that point, it's all pretty clean and cut and dry, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so let's say someone has a partner and they're like, I don't know if this is going to work out. Are there any common signs of like, hey, you got to cut bait on this and just get out while you can, or things that they could do now? Like, I know, like in family law, you kind of have to have a year separation or something and all this kind of stuff. Is there any like prerequisites to like breaking up a partnership of any sort?
So that's a good question. By the time people get to my door,
Yeah.
it is beyond repair.
Okay.
So there have been red flags, there have been minefields. I mean, it is just, there's no reconciliation at this point. And
Yeah.
it's too late, which, is really unfortunate. So I think that there are red flags all along that people either ignore or they don't address. And then, the situation exacerbates and it becomes, its own animal. And that is a really difficult situation to be in because a lot of the people that we see, the business partner is doing some, there's some revenge or vengeance type of thing going
Mm,
on. They're taking down the website, they're trying to steal the clients, they're, stealing the IP. I mean, there's all types of things that people can think of to do to hurt, the business that they're leaving or no longer a part of. And, you definitely want to preempt that and deal
yeah.
with those underlying issues before you get to a situation where you're dealing with. I mean, I've had a lot of people who come to me and we have to file emergency motions to step in because somebody is literally set up shop across the street and has emailed all of the clients and said, come with me. So, that is not where you want to be because that is going to cost more time and money and stress because there's an urgent situation now because you have let this linger.
Yeah, so what can someone do if that happens to them? Like what in law can they do? Like sue that person or try to take them to court for doing something like that?
Yeah, they have a process where you can go in and get a ex parte hearing, which is basically you don't in some circumstances you don't even have to provide notice to the other side, and the court will enter an order to stop whatever the damage is
Mm,
immediately, and then they'll schedule another hearing where everybody is notified to, go through the evidence and see whether the initial ruling was accurate. But I mean, to go into the court and get them to issue an order on the same day, it's got to be something pretty egregious. And we have a lot of those situations because things have just really hit the fan, so to speak. And there are people doing things that are going to irreparably harm the business. And, if that can be avoided by trying to reach a resolution sooner, then I certainly suggest that.
yeah, so let's talk about this a little bit because we're talking right now, about buying or partnering and that kind of stuff. But you also do like contract disputes, landlord tenant issues. But all these issues, you could, yeah, I'm going to take you to court. I'm going to sue you. And from what I know about you, you're more on the mediation side of things, which is like, let's come to an agreement together, not necessarily go to the courts and go through drawn out hearings and that kind of stuff. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you approach that and how you would approach that with someone who's like very upset and wants to sue this person like crazy?
So There's a little bit of a misconception that if you're going the mediation route, that you're not going to sue someone. So
Okay.
mediation can occur before a lawsuit is filed, during the pendency of a lawsuit, after a
Mm,
trial, while things are on appeal. There are mediation options throughout the life cycle of a case. And just because we are proponents of mediation does not mean that we will not help you file a lawsuit against somebody that is, they owe you money, they've taken something that's yours or your business. Like, we file a lot of lawsuits, we defend a lot of lawsuits, but
mm,
at whatever stage you are in the process of litigation, I think it's something to consider. Because if there is a way for you to resolve this while the lawsuit is pending, without waiting a year or two for the court to decide it, without paying attorney's fees for 2 years, which is taking you away, your time and energy away from the business that built, then I think that's certainly something to consider. And a lot of the mediators that we work with have very high resolution rates, and they deal with very complex issues. So, I think that there's an advantage to reaching resolutions where people have buy-in, but I don't think it should be viewed as some type of I don't think it's an alternative to litigation, so to speak, but it's a way to resolve things a little bit quicker, that
yeah.
has buy-in by the parties, and usually a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say someone is an HVAC contractor. They sign a contract, an agreement to replace your HVAC system. It's $20,000, and then the person says, "Well, I'm not paying you because you did X, Y, and Z." Then they could sue that person, obviously, or something could come to some issue. What would the next steps be? Mediation, litigation? How does that work? And what would be the expedited way to do that?
Well, I think that if there's a way to talk to the consumer or whoever bought the product, and reach a resolution, that's certainly preferable. The number one issue that a lot of our clients face is that they don't have very good contracts. And the number one issue in the contract is it doesn't provide for recovery of your attorney's fees.
Mm,
In Virginia, DC, and Maryland, where we work, if you do not have a clause in your contract that says that you will get your attorney's fees on top of whatever you're owed, you're likely not going to get them.
mm,
So if you do your business on a handshake, and then somebody doesn't pay you, and you're owed $20,000, and you go to court and you pay an attorney $10,000 to get you the 20,000, you've only recouped 10. And
mm,
that is a huge consideration, a conversation that we have with people every single day, because getting $30,000, your 10 in attorney's fees on top of the 20, versus just walking away with 10, is a huge difference. And that is one paragraph in a contract that will make that difference. So, we that's the first thing we look at. What does the contract say?
yeah.
And does it have an attorney's fees clause? Because, it's going to be a lot more advantageous for you to try to work out something out of court if you don't have a contract, and if you don't have a contract that has an attorney's fees clause.
Yeah. So inside of contracts, obviously that's a really good one. Is there any like other? I've heard also you want to kind of there's like three parts to a contract of some sort, but or something, but you want to exchange money or something to like solidify the contract, or are there certain things that someone should have or do when they're getting a contract that's gonna like solidify it to the courts?
You're referring to consideration, so there's got to be offer, acceptance, and some exchange of
Yeah.
consideration. But I give this course, it's called The Five Most Litigated Terms in Contracts.
Oh.
So, from a litigation perspective, it is a lot of the same terms that are in a contract that cause people to be in court in in a dispute. Um, a lot of those have to do with payment terms, when you're going to get paid, how much you're going to get paid.
Mm,
A lot of people is very vague or ambiguous about exactly what is it, hourly, is it a retainer, like, is it, there are lots of different ways people can get paid for your time, for your services. Is it a flat fee? People have contracts that are not very clear on what their payment is contingent on,
mm,
and they merge these terms together, and then there's an ambiguity in your contract, and you have to go to court and explain what this contract is supposed to mean. So that's one of them. Indemnification is one of them. If one of the people, for example, gets sued related to something in the contract, who is responsible for that? Arbitration is another one. Routinely, a lot of people put arbitration clauses in their contracts without really understanding what arbitration is, or the cost of arbitration, or how that would work. They hope they'll never they're never in a dispute and they will never have to find out what an arbitration clause is.
Yeah,
But
what is it?
arbitration,
Yeah,
so
what is
it
it?
basically means that you are bound to go to this private organization to resolve your dispute. But the difference between arbitration and court is, one, you have to pay for it. You have to pay for the
Mm,
administration of it. You got to pay for the quote unquote judge who's going to decide your case. And there are very few appeal rights. So if the judge gets it wrong, you're kind of screwed. So, if you go to court, the your tax dollars are paying that judge. You're not paying an hourly rate for the judge to decide your case. So it is significantly less expensive. So in arbitration, you're paying your attorneys and you're paying the administration who, hires the quote unquote judge or arbitrator, and you're paying the arbitrator. So it's
mm,
way more expensive. And like I said, there's not appeal rights. In court, if you lose, you can just appeal it to the next court. And then in most cases, you can
yeah,
get a whole new trial. So, and we've had cases where we've lost at the lower court, appealed it, and won,
yeah,
at a higher court. Like, judges get it wrong. So,
yes,
I don't think that arbitration is the best option in most small business cases. It is a very beneficial option if you are, let's say, Amazon, and you're employing a lot of independent contractors. That's
yeah,
probably, they're very pro arbitration for a lot of reasons. But for the small business owner, it's gonna cost you a lot more money to go to arbitration to get what you're owed than it is in most cases than to go to court. So, and arbitration clauses are prone to be litigated. So if you have an arbitration clause, people file in court anyway, and then there's this whole back, motions and hearings about whether the arbitration clause is valid or whether it's too vague or whether it was conspicuous or whether it's, equitable. So then you're in this argument about where the lawsuit should be, which is, in my opinion, a lot of money that could be avoided.
yes.
So I'm not a big fan of them, and a lot of contracts have those in them. So, that's another thing that is in the most litigated clauses.
Okay. Uh, what about subcontractor agreements? Because you're kind of talking about the Amazon thing, and it got me thinking. A lot of the contractors that we work with, they'll have subs that do certain things. Are there? I'm sure there's agreements and issues with, paying subs, and this person's suing this person. Are there things that you've seen that are like, hey, when you're working with subcontractors, well, first you probably got to have agreement for sure. But then, are there other things that they should be thinking about when they're setting up these agreements or partnerships?
That's the biggest issue I would say that we see is people change the terms of the agreement. So even if you have an agreement, then you change it and you have
Mm,
some handshake side deal.
mm,
And most agreements say changes need to be in writing and signed by both parties. That is a very common clause. But people are like, oh, well, it's just Joe, and I know Joe, and I've worked with Joe, so we'll just agree that you do this extra work, or we'll change the scope, or we'll change the payment, or we'll add this, or we'll subtract that. None of that gets memorialized. They assigned the original agreement, but they did not make any written changes to it. And then there inevitably is a dispute with what the agreement was that Joe was going to do on the side, and it's just so unfortunate because you have a contract, but now you have all this other stuff that's not in there.
that's right.
So that
I
is a
think
very common scenario.
Yeah, I think you build so much trust with these people that you're just like, it's Joe, kind of even like your business partner. It's like we're like best, we're in it, and then it's like it dissolves, and you're like, man, I would never think that this could happen, but it happens.
Yes. The cost is so minimal to like add an addendum or add a paragraph or do a change order. I mean, most times, a lot of our contracts, they have a change order form like attached to it that needs to be filled out, and people still don't do that. And they just, shake
Yeah,
hands and move forward. And, it works until it doesn't. And, 90% of the time it may work out, but the 10% that it doesn't can, cost you a substantial amount of money. So.
definitely. So is this something businesses that have contracts they could find someone like you and send you their contract and or set up a meeting and like, hey, could you review this contract and make sure that it's like in compliance and tight so that way I'm covered?
Yes. I mean, we have both situations. We have general contractors that are entering into subcontracts and bidding on jobs, and, the volume of contracts that they go through with different parties is high. So, we're dealing with them constantly on new
Mm-hmm.
agreements because we want to negotiate those agreements in their favor. But then you have other people who are more in the startup phase and they have one sub or one independent contractor or one employee. And I think that in both scenarios, it's equally as important to have an agreement. Um, a lot of our cases are what I call the napkin agreements, where people just, they write it on a napkin, and it's
I've
just
been
like,
there. I've been there. I'm sure most business owners. I think a lot of business owners, they're the type of people that the rules don't apply to them. They always break the stereotypes, and they're just like rogue agents, just doing their thing. And it's like, and you're like, hold on, let me reel you back in here, buddy. Like, let's get this cleaned up.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think people are under the impression that it's just like thousands of dollars and very long conversations, and this is just like, it's going to be an impediment to whatever you're trying to do. But I just think that's a big perception of what it would take to get, an addendum or an agreement, or it is not. It is 5 times more expensive on the back end if there's a dispute. So.
Absolutely. So most businesses, they're either leasing or they own their real estate, but the landlord tenant thing, I feel like that's a hot one for a lot of the companies that we work with, where they're leasing space. Maybe they're in warehouse space and its rents are increasing like crazy. And maybe there's that back and napkin stuff, or something's happening. What have you seen on that side? Or what can people say, like, hey, I want to make sure this is in my lease agreement, or something that they should do to protect themselves from that?
So most of the people that we deal with commercial leases have not reviewed the lease. Commercial leases are not like residential leases where it's a few pages, just like a book, and they just
Yeah.
flip to the last page and sign, because they're so excited about, starting the new business and moving into a space, and, there's so much, enjoyment going into that negotiating a lease is like, you can see that more people who have scaled their business are more likely to come to us with a lease and say, look, we want to get the best possible terms. A lot of times startup businesses just believe that the lease is not negotiable, which is not true. There are a lot of terms in there. Yes, leases are written in the landlord's favor, but there are some key terms in there that certainly can be negotiated. We negotiate leases all the time, and you lose all of the leverage after you sign the lease. I mean, now you're in. So,
Yeah, what are some
they
of
want
those?
you to move in.
Yeah, what are
That's
some
the
of those
time to
key
negotiate.
ones that you would say, like a couple terms?
So HVAC is one of them. Who is going to be responsible for that? What is the condition of the HVAC? Commercial HVAC is extremely expensive to replace if there's an
Yeah.
issue with it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people take full responsibility for any kind of HVAC issues, not knowing what condition the HVAC is in, hoping and praying that it'll be all right. And if there is an issue, I've had a client who had an issue with the HVAC. They had to close their business. They couldn't afford to get it fixed. It was just, they didn't even know that HVAC clause was in their contract and that they were solely responsible for it. And, their high season was their doors were closed because of an HVAC clause that they weren't even aware of.
Wow.
We've had cases about exclusivity clauses, whether the landlord can open up a similar business in, let's say, the shopping center that you're in. And we've had that happen before, and that can substantially impact your revenue. So it
like
is
you're a
very
gym,
important.
you're a gym, and then they're gonna open a gym right next to you or something like that.
Yes. If there is no,
Yeah.
when you're going into the lease, the landlord usually doesn't care
Yeah,
about that exclusivity clause because they don't have another gym that wants to rent. So
Yeah.
that's usually something that's pretty easy to negotiate in your lease. But if you sign it and then they bring in a gym, what are we going to do now? That's not in there. There's nothing prohibiting them from doing that. And now your revenue is cut in half because, they're going to the
Yeah.
gym next door and they have options. That's the market will determine, what your landlord will do. And sometimes they will take that tenant, even though it will impact your income in order to fill a space. So we've seen that happen. I've had, they run the gamut of different
Yeah.
issues, but I would just say that a lot of the clauses in another one. So prevailing party attorney's fees. We would like to see that if you end up in a dispute, whoever wins the dispute gets their attorney's fees. A lot of times landlords will write their lease so that they are the only party entitled to attorney's fees if a dispute arises. So you want that to be even. The winner gets their fees, not just the landlord. And that's something that's usually easily negotiable if you bring it up at the beginning before you move in. So
Wow, those are really good. Those are really good. I'm sure businesses don't look at that.
Yeah. And we had a very long dispute having to do with zoning. The property wasn't zoned for whatever the business wanted to do. And they didn't know that until they got in there, and that turned into a lawsuit.
Wow.
So, you
Yeah,
know,
we had a client. They do millwork and cabinet making and painting. Well, the fumes that they have, apparently this building wasn't zoned to be able to like put this specific type of thing that releases these gases or something. And they signed this agreement and they couldn't use the building because they didn't think of all this stuff. But you don't know. That's why you get professionals involved, obviously.
you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. All right. So switching gears a little bit to something fun. So when people are looking to scale, not that it's not fun, but something more exciting for some people than getting sued for their bad contracts or something. But if someone's looking to scale their business and they're looking maybe at thinking about like stock option or giving their top players like their sales, their VP of sales, their VP of production, their COO, like those type of people, some stock options or some type of incentive. How do they even begin the process of thinking about how that would go? Like, yeah, how does it work?
That is a great question, and that is a great option, especially for startups. And you might not have a lot of capital, but you want to bring on really talented people to give them some buy-in into the business, which they can recoup in the future. Is a good way to scale your business without having a lot of capital on the front end.
Mm.
And we see a lot of people do that. Stock option agreements are not the easiest to put together. They can be somewhat costly, but depending on how many people you're going to, give the stock options to, it can be a very advantageous option for your employees or partners or people in the business.
Is there like a breakdown that you have seen? I've seen Shark Tank, and they're like, "Don't give up, 30% of your business, whatever." But like, have you seen it or any recommendations on like how people would slice things up, or maybe like a tiered system? Like, hey, after a certain amount of time, you get this much stuff, or what do you think?
Yeah, most of the time it's based upon time, how long the person is in the company, and sometimes it's based upon performance. Stock options there are a number of ways to skin the cat, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of different intricacies to that you can build into it, however you want that to be structured. We have people who create those before they even open the door because they know that they're going to need them to retain the talent that they need. So, it just depends on where you are in their business. But normally it's more startup companies that, want to bring on people and may not have the capital to do that. And that is a great way to do that.
Okay. The other fun thing that I like is selling businesses. That is something that I feel like we've gone through it with maybe 4 or 5 businesses, and it's a bear to go through without the litigation side of things, but just like the due diligence process and answering all their questions and questions. So if someone's thinking about selling their business, and obviously you got to find a buyer and stuff, but how does someone go through that process of like protecting themselves, but then also making sure that they get the correct amount of money for their business? Where do you
Well, if you've ever sold a business, you know what the word due diligence means, or bought one. I mean,
Yeah.
it can be a daunting process, but the purpose of due diligence is to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for, and that there are no surprises on the back end after you buy the business. And depending on what type of business you're buying, that can be that could take 6 months. It could take a year depending on what type of business you're in. But it's just basically looking through all the information, seeing if there's litigation, seeing what type of contracts, reviewing leases, looking at all of the documentation so that you can make sure that you're getting what you're paying for. So
So
that is a big component.
definitely. So let's say someone's thinking about selling their business. Someone approaches them and says like, "Hey, I want to make you an offer. I'm going to go through due diligence. I just need you to sign this letter of intent." Should they reach out to an attorney to be like, "Hey, can you just make sure all this is good," or do they just sign the letter of intent and go through the due diligence? Like, when do they actually reach out to an attorney to help them in this process?
So we have had people reach out to us to draft the letter of intent, and we have had people reach out to us and they said, I've known this person for a long time. I understand the business. I just want you to draft the buy sell, and we're ready to go.
Wow.
And if you're comfortable with that, and you feel like you know enough about the business. There's some businesses that are not that complex that people don't feel like it's necessary to go through that process, and it may not be. And we can help you draft the agreement to just get the business sold and go to closing. So it really depends on one, your familiarity with purchasing businesses and how well you know the person who's selling it. Is it just you went through a broker, or is it somebody that you know? Because we have a lot of people who somebody has worked in the business and somebody is retiring and they want to take it over, so they know the ins and outs of the businesses, they know the liabilities, they know the clients, they know the books. So that's a different situation. You don't need the same level of due diligence because you're basically in the business, right? So
Yes.
I think that you can get legal assistance at any point. I don't think there's a right or wrong there. It just kind of depends.
Okay. What would you say coming up is a big change in the industry? AI and all this kind of stuff, and everyone's got a lawyer in their back pocket with ChatGPT or something. But I'm laughing. We're both laughing if you can't see this. What would you say about that in the industry, and how is this going to shape things in the future? And what's your thoughts?
Love technology, and I think Chat GPT and AI is a wonderful. I think it's great. I think it's great for so many business owners and provides another tool to help them scale their business. I think that with anything, it can be abused or overused. um, there was a situation where an attorney had their entire brief written on Chat GPT, and there were cases in there that weren't actual cases and did not turn out well for them. So I think you need to do your due diligence, so to speak, and double check what AI. But I think it is a great tool. It is extremely helpful if used correctly and with the correct oversight.
Yeah, I guess I could see attorneys using discovery and running stuff into discovery and then running it through some prompting and pull things out. I could see how it might shave off a lot of time from discovery.
I was just in a seminar where they were talking about that, and AI you can just put in the parameters of the search, and I think you have to be comfortable that there will be a certain margin of error. But if you compare that to the time that it would take a human to go through these documents, which also has a margin of error, it
Yeah.
usually is much. It's worth it in most of the situations, and it is a relatively small margin of error because of the way AI has developed. So a lot of people are using that now for document productions, and it is certainly a great tool.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. One of my friends, when I was thinking about the ChatGPT, one of my friends is a lawyer, and her favorite term is "it depends." So I could see ChatGPT as the default. It depends. It depends. It
Yes. Yes. This lawyer answer.
Yeah, that's so funny. Well, Margot, thanks so much. You've added so much value, and I really appreciate you sharing this information. Where's the best place people can get in contact with you? Where should they go?
So we just revamped our website, thomaslawplc.com, and it has lots of helpful information about wherever you are in your business, helping you scale your business, start a business, sell a business. So I encourage anyone listening to check that out. There's a lot of free resources on there. Our contact information, you can certainly pick up the phone and give us a call at 703-957-2577. And our email information is on the website. I encourage you to go check it out.
Awesome. And where's your jurisdictions? DC, Maryland, Virginia?
Maryland, yes.
Okay, cool. So if you don't have a lawyer and you need a lawyer, you got one now because you just listen to this podcast. So go call her. I'm even thinking about my contracts and maybe I should have someone review them. So thank you so much. I appreciate your
Thank you.
time. Yep. And I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, sounds good.
See ya.